So welcome to the third year of the Independent Accountability Panel's review of the Energy Charter disclosures. In starting the meeting, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. So thank you, Energy Queensland, for your disclosure, and congratulations on your commitment to the Energy Charter and the Better Together initiatives. We have, as you know, Cassandra Goldie from ACOS and Andrew Richards from the EUAA. Just a few opening comments. It's regrettable that in 2021, we're still having to talk about the impact of COVID-19 on individuals, families and businesses around Australia, including energy businesses, as well as natural disasters in some areas, the upsurge in housing pressures for many people around Australia, and as well as other financial pressures. So as a result of that, we consider that the themes of this year's report are likely to be very similar to those of last year: affordability of essential services, transition to net zero emissions by 2050 or preferably earlier, with the consequent key issue that no customers should be left behind in that transition, particularly on the grounds of affordability. And those themes have generally been confirmed by the stakeholder forums that we've already held. So we wanted to discuss that with you and the other CEOs who were signatories to the Charter, and to get your perspective. So we have some questions for you, but I thought in the beginning, I'd just ask you, Rod, to make some opening remarks, highlights, anything you'd like to highlight from your disclosure, and then we can open it up for discussion. So over to you.
Look, thank you for that. Look, over the last year, and I've now been in this role for just over 18 months, we've been trying to get the entire business focused around sort of three key themes or priorities. And how we arrived at these themes, at least how I arrived at them, was because I was trying to see what was important to our customers. And from a customer perspective, we concluded that there are three things that are really important to customers, and therefore they should be important to our business. And the first is safety. I think that our customers expect that what we do, that our own workforce will be safe, and that what we do will be safe, and that our assets that are present in the community will be safe. And it's almost like a given, but it takes a lot of effort to make sure that's the case. The second key theme or priority is one about reliability and keeping the lights on, because that's, as the sort of distribution business that is the largest portion of Energy Queensland, both the Energex network and the Ergon network in regional Queensland. Keeping the lights on is what people expect of the electricity system, and adjacent to customers, be they small or large, most of those customers, where the utility, where the player whom they hold accountable for the reliable supply of electricity, which is becoming, and COVID has sort of accelerated this, with people working from home and their expectations changing. The expectation that our assets and our services will be reliable is becoming more and more prominent. And the third key theme or priority is that of affordability. And affordability means a couple of things to us as Energy Queensland. One is obviously the portion of somebody's power bill, whether they're buying it for their electricity from Ergon Retail in regional Queensland, or if they're buying their electricity from other retailers in the southeast or other parts of the state, then the portion of that bill that they receive each quarter or each month or whatever, that is attributable to our business, needs to be affordable. It doesn't make up 100% of the price, but it's a significant portion of what they pay for electricity, and therefore making sure that what we do is efficient and cost effective, and that we don't waste money, and that we're efficient in the way that we deliver the work that we need to do, is important, and more so perhaps for Energy Queensland than any other sort of utility company, because we're actually owned by the taxpayers of Queensland. We're actually owned by the citizens of Queensland, many of whom, of course, are the exactly same people as our customers. Making sure that since we're owned by the state, owned by the taxpayers, that whether it's the affordability of the power bill or the fact that what we do on behalf of the state and our owners, the taxpayers, is done efficiently, making sure that we do that in a cost-effective way and that we have financial sustainability is really important. And of course, quite interestingly, of course, most customers will be focused on their power bill, on price, and how much electricity costs them for their household or for their business. And that's completely understandable. And that's absolutely the case right up to the point where the lights go out. And then they're not worried about price. Then they want to make sure that when the light's coming back on, when's the power coming back on? And of course, the only thing that then trumps that, of course, is when assets are damaged by storms or cyclones or other climatic events or other issues. And then, of course, they want to make sure that our assets are safe in their community and they're safe in their streets. So, the issues of safety and reliability are somewhat forgotten right up to the point when they become important. So we've done a lot over the last year in making sure that right throughout our business, all elements of our business, all 7,500 people that we employ, plus all the contractors we employ, that those three themes, which are derived from what customers expect of us as a business, what the entire business is focused around.
You're right. I think you're right that people don't think about those things until something, safety and reliability. But I think it's also, to be honest, something that customers just assume they should take for granted. It's you've been in business a long time, and I think people would have that expectation that it is safe and it is reliable. But I think the big issue, obviously, is that third area of affordability. There are lots and lots of issues there, and that's what one of the themes that we'd like to discuss today. So, Cass, would you like to start off?
Yeah, thanks, Rod, and good to see you, Michael and Kenny and Mark as well, I think. So, Rod, thank you very much for your disclosure, and I know that it's been one of those years where you might have had some plans and then there were some other plans that needed to be implemented again. I think I do want to go to your opener and pick up on Claire's comment with that sort of assessment about what is most important to customers, how you base that as your top three. The assessment we've got is actually the customers are much more further down the track in terms of expectations. The debates about both affordability and sustainability, they're pretty key issues. So just keen to get some comments from you about where you base that. And then secondly, I see with the metrics that you've been tracking on a sort of affordability with the decline of bill concern. If you could speak to what you think as being the key drivers of that, and how many of those drivers are short term because of the income supports that were in place, for example, last year, some of the special measures that governments might have put in place to respond to COVID, and what of that reflects structural changes that we can rely on for the future. They're first a couple of openers from me. Thanks, Claire.
So I might try to address the first and second questions. I got a bit mixed together, so maybe I can
I'm just testing further this sort of notion that they're the top three in terms of customer concerns, because from other places we would think that probably it goes affordability, and then also increasingly, you know, where's my power coming from, and you know, rather than the very basics of safety and reliability. So, but happy to move on to the second question, which gets us into more detail about what you think are some of the drivers of the changes to the bill concern.
I think you're right. There are a range of other issues which customers are becoming aware of, which is where does their power come from?
Yeah.
Here in Queensland, of course, we've seen a record rate of rooftop solar adoption. In fact, I think we're probably leading the nation and perhaps the world in terms of the proportion of businesses and households that have adopted rooftop solar as part of their energy supply strategy. And indeed, of course, when it comes to providing electricity, we're not a generator. Yes, we provide power at 33 remote locations in Torres Strait and the Gulf and Cape York and the Far West, where we generate power for those communities, but effectively as a community service, because nobody else wants to or could afford to do so. And of course, the provision of that electricity supply to those regional communities that are not connected to the grid is something which the state government provides a very substantial, many tens of millions of dollars to effectively subsidise and support those communities in those far-flung remote locations. But when it comes to being the grid, we're not a generator, so we actually don't control or determine the source of electricity, what it's generated from. That's not to say that we don't play an important role as part of the overall electricity supply system in actually getting electricity to people's premises. That's our primary job as a network. And increasingly, of course, take electricity from their premises as they've got excess generation from rooftop solar during the day. But you're right, it is becoming for many folks an important consideration. And it's perhaps because they take reliability and safety for granted until they're not there. But as a network operator, if we didn't focus on the safety of our equipment or our people, our community and our customers, if we didn't focus on reliability, those things would quickly deteriorate. And then they would become top of mind issues for people, because nothing focuses the mind like a cold shower, because there's no power. It's
just on, if I can, just on that, right, I think, and this is feedback we've had from consumer advocates generally too. They're saying, well, what's the particular purpose of the charter? And the particular purpose of the charter is to be really out the front, leading, being ahead of the, covering the basics, the business as usual, all that. And so we, in this discussion this afternoon, we'll probably focus on particularly charter related aspects of what you're doing. So hence my question, saying in terms of what had been delivered on the sort of bill concern, how much of that are about really important improvements that have been made that you've played a role in to tackle affordability, and what you think some of those key drivers are, how many of them you think are temporary, to what extent you've got a role in pushing to try and get that, to ensure that affordability improvements, if that's what you're reporting here, are going in the right direction, not the other way around.
Well, I guess as a business, the most significant thing that we've contributed in the last year is, of course, that through the regulatory reset and the pricing that we proposed as part of the regulatory 1st of July last year, we ended up at a much lower WACC, a much lower rate of return for our $27 billion worth of assets that we have in our regulated asset base. And that had an immediate flow-on effect into the network costs, and therefore, those costs could and should and needed to be passed on to consumers by the retailers. So in terms of financial sacrifice, our business, I think, has done an awful lot, given the very substantial decrease in what we get to earn on our assets towards making power more affordable for all consumers. In terms of making sure that we address the issue which you were touching on before around where the electricity is sourced from, we committed to a trial of 5 8-megawatt hour batteries, which we're in the process of finishing the engineering and starting to roll out. We should have the first one installed before Christmas. And that's something we've taken on as a cost and project for ourselves, because making sure that there's battery storage available to store the excess power being generated during the middle of the day from people's rooftop solar units in particular, to store that locally close by where it's been generated, then deliver it back in the evening when people need power in the evening peak, and to do that in a way which improves the performance of the network, but also means that line losses, you're not taking electricity off somebody's roof and taking it 1,000 kilometres away into the bush to store it. You're storing it, in a substation, in a battery in a substation that's maybe in the same suburb or a couple of suburbs away. So we think we're trying to start to play a role, and we hope to play a more significant role in making sure that people's access to electricity, which has been in very large part in terms of the change of the source of electricity being driven by consumers themselves by putting rooftop solar in, that we actually facilitate further solar generation by making sure that that power doesn't go to waste, that it's actually used and it's stored and then reused in the evening. So,
Rod, can I just
whether that addresses your question, I'm not sure.
No, there's a couple of aspects to it. So the first bit, if I could just focus on the sort of straight up affordability question, and you've referred there to some of the systems improvements you've done around the access to concessions, and I'm curious about, so one of the, if you talk to across the sector, from a consumer point of view, they'll talk a lot about saying, we just got to make sure people are getting the concessions that they're entitled to. I mean, that's like, 101. Why wouldn't we make sure that we're doing that? And I can see the communication improvements that you've flagged there. I'm just curious about, given the particular relationship you have with government and the fact that often these concessions are actually designed and delivered by government, is this, as a charter signatory, a great example of where you could say, we're going to be the ones that automate the fact that you're going to get a concession unless you don't want one? Because show me a customer who doesn't want their concession, as long as the data ensures that they're eligible for it. So we would like to see, it's been flagged at each panel process, this one about making sure people get access to the concessions. Is that an area where you could take the great leap forward and do the work with government to get that done on a whole of system scale?
Well, the example I'd give, and for sure it may not have happened in the last year, but I know it's the case, it's happened in the last couple of years, that for people in a lot of those remote locations where we supply and we even generate the power, that we worked out that whilst the individual in a household who happens to be the person whose name is on the power bill, the invoice for the power on the connection agreement, they might not be necessarily due for a concession. There will be somebody in those disadvantaged communities. There will be somebody in that household who is, and therefore a more pragmatic and simpler way to do things would just be basically to apply those concessions uniformly to every household that's connected to that particular network, a particular remote network. So if I think that's as an example of a way where I think we may have led in this space, even nationally, to say, look, it's actually having to sift through and work out, this particular household is eligible because the person whose name on the bill ticks the right boxes, but this household isn't because that person's actually earning income, but there's a bunch of other people in the household who aren't. To just take a uniform approach and to give every household that concession is something, whether that can be applied more widely, I guess, will probably be a matter of government policy. But the...
Have you been in discussion with government about that?
Michael, you might want to chip in if you can, whether we've actually had a particular conversation.
I certainly can, Rod, and Cassandra, it is something that we have raised with government because the Queensland government doesn't have access to all of the Centrelink data, I understand, in terms of enabling a application to all of those eligible customers. So there have been discussions, I think, between the states and the federal government. Rod's quite right. In those Indigenous isolated communities, we advocated to the government and came up with a rationale where we said we expect that all householders, for example, in Kawanyama, would have at least one person in that house that would be eligible for the concession. So why don't we go the other way around and apply it to every single connection point? And if there was a council that wouldn't be eligible, then we would take that particular one out. So it's a good example that you raised. We have done that in all of those isolated Indigenous communities. Then what we've done for all of the other communities is really up our communications around that. Particularly, you might have seen that in this last 12 months, we were able to get over 50% of customers onto digital channels for our retailer, which meant that we were able to give pop-up advice on you might be eligible for these particular rebates. You can access them in sort of touch of a button situation there. So we've certainly been advancing. I think that the example that you've used is one that we could potentially raise further with levels of government, noting it has been tried in the past, and I think I'm not sure the exact outcome there, but I think there were some privacy issues, but I'm sure that those things have been sorted out in other circumstances. So we would certainly be supportive
for vaccination purposes, for example.
For example.
Yeah,
and
for
then
example.
There's also the issue between,
yeah.
Then there's also the account holder versus the person who might be eligible. So that's another area where there's been challenges there. But yes, I think that we should raise that again.
And in an earlier meeting, we talked about, working to the strengths of different signatories. You've got a particular position where you could really break through with that kind of agreement with the federal government to demonstrate what it looks like when you properly roll out concessions to ensure that everybody who's entitled to them is getting it. We predict it's not going to necessarily get easier for lots and lots of people with what's going on economically there. And so we'll probably pick that up. Now, just Andrew, you might want to comment just about on the sort of, the energy efficiency side and also the distributed energy side, but I might just see if there's anything you want to lead with on the transition before we touch on that.
I mean, I'll just stay on this topic just for a sec.
Sure.
I think it actually does lead into the next part of the discussion anyway.
Yeah.
What we're getting to here, I think what's coming across is that organisations like yours are highly proficient technically, and you come up with really smart technical solutions. That is your DNA, and that's the lane that you feel comfortable in. And I think the other conversation we've been having too is the charter is about getting outside of your lane a little bit and doing that next step beyond what you would normally consider to be your traditional sort of modus operandi. So the research you've done, and Claire talked about it being hygiene issues. What I'm interested in is is there anything showing up in that the more granular aspects of that research and of your understanding of customer that can perhaps give us some more indications of early stage of vulnerability or growing debt concerns that we can jump on before they become a problem? So one of the other themes that comes up in consumer land is don't pick people up after they fall, stop them from falling over in the first place. So one of our themes has been, how do we avoid it occurring in the first place? Is there something in the data that we can start to extract to get a better handle on that, and therefore start designing the programs that Cass is talking about to avoid the problem? Are you doing that work? Are you seeing any of that come through?
I'm not sure you asked the question of me or Michael.
Either.
I'm very happy to dive in if you like there, Andrew. I think one of the good examples, if you look at hardship policies, obviously there are requirements for hardship policies in some areas. However, Energy Queensland, particularly through our retailer, took the position that we wouldn't be limited to householders and those very residential style customers. And we were the first to develop a hardship policy for business. And the reason we did that was through the research that we were doing around regional segmentation for customers and the types of businesses that you might have, particularly in regional Queensland, and working out what were some of the attributes of those customers and how is it that you could keep them in the sort of program of being closely connected with our retailer, because we determined very early on that the best way to help a customer through a period where they were facing difficulty was to keep in contact with them. And even just a payment of a small bit of a bill while they were in a program where there was no risk of them being disconnected gave them the support that they would need to be able to get through that particular period. We also saw that with COVID as well. We didn't wait for the AAR's statement of expectations. We did our own work in that period. And even when the program changed from the AAR on the 1st of July, we didn't wait for them to change our disconnection approach. I didn't need a phone call from them. We'd already put that in place at the time because we know that it's much more difficult to deal with longer term problems than come up with something to support customers in the very beginning, which is why I think we were quite successful through the COVID period, and obviously that continues in different forms now, by having that close relationship with customers, showing them that by getting into the hardship program or having a payment plan and maintaining the relationship rather than just saying you're not going to be disconnected and that's it, is much more beneficial in terms of the long-term benefits. And to go back to what I think was your question and Cassandra's earlier on, in terms of where we're seeing that maybe a little bit of a better position in terms of what people think about price, it's a range of areas. Rod quite rightly talked about the significant changes through our regulatory proposal. That was significant, not only from a price perspective and investment perspective, but also changes in tariffs. Then, of course, because we are a government-owned organisation, any dividends we make, which are very small compared to what they used to be, go back to the taxpayer and then go back to retail customers. So last month, we again applied another $50 dividend to bills all across Queensland. And of course, that's on top of the one that happened towards the end of last year, and the Queensland government, with our support, moving very quickly to provide those financial support mechanisms to not only residential customers but businesses. And then I think some of the other attributes we've seen during this period is some of those elements I talked about, with particularly our retail customers able to access online information about rebates, more campaigns about rebates. I think obviously in Queensland, in some particular segments, we haven't seen some of those tougher economic conditions, and there's been a number of support programs as well. But I think what we're seeing is a relationship with our customers that mean they feel a little bit more secure in terms of their utility bill when it relates to electricity than they might with some others. whether it might be their mortgage payments or council rates bills for those that can actually own a home, or phone bills and others. So there's certainly been a moderation there. Do I think it's forever? That remains to be seen, but I think we have put some of the scaffolding in place to assist our customers in Queensland. Always more to be done, and you know, one other thing I'd mention as well is a lot of partnerships with community as well. So you know, we're just about to have another program, a support program with Uniting that'll be tripartite with our transmission business and one of our generators here in Queensland. Obviously, we do the Indigenous Consumer Assistance Network work, and partnerships with our other customer council organisations. We're obviously very deliberate about having them look at our disclosure statements and providing commentary on that before we even submit it, so that they can keep us honest about the things that we really have done.
So you don't feel as though then being a Queensland government-owned utility is an inhibitor to you being a bit more expansive or being more innovative in this space? Because I think when I look at your disclosure and your self-assessment on principle one, which is putting customers at the centre, it's still sitting at that emerging. So I'm just, to go to the next level and the level beyond probably requires you to do a lot more. And I'm just wondering whether you're feeling constrained in doing that, or whether you feel that there's a level of liberation that, provided what you're doing is in line with what customers want, you feel emboldened and liberated to do that. What one is it? Is it constrained or liberated?
Well, I think we're certainly liberated. I guess we've benchmarked against ourselves, and I'd probably say that within the boxes, we've moved forward in the boxes, but haven't taken the leap to go into the next one, if you know what I mean. So I think we've certainly advanced, but we weren't, going to say that we'd actually made that big step. I think in some areas, we're certainly liberated, and I think in some areas, we've certainly advanced in segments, but I wouldn't say enough to truly say we've moved on to that next box yet.
Thank you.
Right, if I in that theme, Andrew, I was just interested. You put here that you've got a focus of sort of action-based research, and you know, given the particular position that you've got in the community, when you talked about that, understanding the lag effects of COVID, can you just give some more detail about how sort of public will that be as an opportunity for you to push for the systemic structural changes that are needed in order to really make sure we're using the best technologies to help people to reduce their bills further, with the, people, and not just rely on sort of the market to deliver on that, I suspect, because, there are people who can afford to get solar panels, all that's fine. We know we've got large groups of people who are still pretty much left behind on accessing the sorts of technologies that help you to really, be in 2021, frankly, in terms of what you can do on your energy use. So I see you've got this action research there. It'd be just great to hear how you're planning to use that as a kind of a further tool to push for some of the changes. I suppose that your theme of, Andrew, whether it's going to empower or constrain you even further. It's just, I'd like to just get an idea of that.
I might just
Michael or Rod, thanks.
I'll make a quick introductory comment, and then I know Rod is all over this because this is his main, piece as being the chief executive here. Right. Because a lot of this is around minimum demand. So the reason we talk so much around the network and network of the future is because if we don't make some of those changes now, we will be in a difficult place in the future. So, the batteries that Rod was talking about, one of the things we want to do there is see how it is that those that can't participate in the renewable energy future, because they might be vulnerable, they might not be able to afford it up front, they might be a renter, they might be in a high rise, what types of tariffs or programs, subscription services, whatever it might be, can we provide to customers so they can engage in that? Of course, what I'm really saying here though is there needs to be fundamental changes in the regulatory environment for that to occur. So we are constrained from that perspective, but it's not stopping us pushing the envelope on those things. So when it comes to battery, other demand devices, while we also keep the network safe. So in the research that we've been doing, we know that customers want to participate in that future, but they don't have the entry point to be able to do that, which is exactly why we're pursuing some of the initiatives that we are in relation to, getting a framework for electric vehicle use in the future, for other opportunities for customers to purchase solar and battery products that they might not be able to afford to. But Rod, I'm not sure if you want to make some comments around the work we've done in that space with Peter Price from that engineering and strategy perspective.
Well, yeah, just probably 2 points. 2 points. One is making sure that we can move electricity, in fact, excess electricity that's being generated from rooftop solar in particular, and to store it and then bring back in the evening. It's going to be important for keeping stable electricity supply. So insufficient minimum demand is a growing and important issue. It's been recognised by AEMO as something that needs to be addressed, and we're doing our best to address it. But from a customer point of view, look, people who do have rooftop solar and are looking to sort of optimise their energy costs. Many of them are looking at batteries to be installed in the home, but while some conclude that it's viable for them, many at this stage are saying, look, they're just too expensive, and or I don't have the space to put them. They're quite bulky. There are some issues around where you might place them under the home or outside the home. So, providing an alternative which can be more cost effective, require less capital commitment, make it more affordable to people who don't have, they don't have $10,000 in their pocket in order to go and buy their own battery, but they could be better off overall if they could rent some space in a battery that was local to them. We think these are interesting and useful concepts, and we'd like to see if they can be taken further, because at the moment there's a sort of certainly for many folks there's a sort of a cost barrier to entry, which we'd like to think we can help overcome.
So it's interesting. So that's a bit of a common theme with a number of other networks that we're talking to around. And I think, Michael, you mentioned there's regulatory barriers to this, to particularly rapid rollout of things like community batteries and those sorts of things. There's maybe even ACCC implications, that kind of stuff. I'm wondering, under the Better Together initiatives, is there something brewing around this? Because this to me seems like a place where we have an opportunity to not leave people behind, for those people in rentals or the sorts of people you're talking about, to have access to this great future that people with money in their pocket can afford. Is there something brewing there, you think, that we can be working on?
And just before you answer that, Rod, it almost seems to me a no-brainer. And why would the regulator stand in the way of all the people that you're talking about, renters, low-income people, remote communities, people in high-rise? Why would they stand in the way of community batteries and shared distributed facilities? So I guess our question is, can you and the industry push on this and push hard, because it should be something that is achievable in the short term, I would have thought. Maybe I'm just being Pollyanna.
The answer is we are pushing, and we are pushing as hard as we can without being obnoxious about it. The whole electricity system model is, there's a whole lot of rules to follow. There's a whole lot of process to follow, and it doesn't move very nimbly sometimes unless you really want it to. So we think that we'll continue to advocate and push for tariff changes that are more equitable and provide mechanisms where we can get access for a broader range of people in different economic circumstances to have access to better solutions, including collective access to electricity storage systems.
So what extent can you do this anyway under ring fencing, Rod?
Indeed, that's one of the constraints that we have to work through. We've got a retail business, but we've all in the regional areas of Queensland, but we've also, of course, with a network operator across the whole state. So ring fencing considerations need to be carefully thought through to make sure we don't trip over a rule or a requirement which would put us on the wrong side of the regulations.
Yeah, for sure.
Rod, of all the industries in the country, I think energy is among those who have to do long-term planning. You just have to. So I wonder, how do you see Energy Queensland in 10 years? What will you look like, and what will be significantly different?
Well, to be fair, I still think that there's going to be a need for networks to interconnect generation and consumption points on the system. I don't subscribe to a view that says everybody will be generating their own power and they'll be disconnected from a grid. And for a whole bunch of security supply reasons, there'll be very few people that take that step of saying, disconnect me from the network. And indeed, I think at a distribution network level, the ability to interconnect what has become the largest generator in the country, which is rooftop solar, to interconnect all those little generators from all those households and small businesses, and interconnect them with storage facilities, as well, of course, as alternate sources of supply when the sun's not shining or the wind's not blowing, or both. That networks are going to become even more essential than they have been in the past. The difference is, of course, is that electricity is going to be flowing in different directions, as it is already, depending upon the time of day and the load and the supply from those different parts of the network. It's making our job as a network operator increasingly complex. Because, of course, all that rooftop generation, it's happening where it's coming from where the electricity used to end up, and the systems weren't designed in that to cater for that. They're doing okay and surviving now, but they're going to need further refinement and enhancement over time to make sure that they can be robust and reliable into the future. Certainly, we have a view that the networks are going to need to become increasingly sophisticated, not just the dumb old poles and wires business that it might have been some decades past. A far more intelligent, connected, data-intensive and managed system compared to what it might have been before.
Yeah, I mean, Rod, the access to solar, of course, it's very variable. We've got a construction boom going on around the country, lots of places being built, and we've still got places being built that aren't to the best of the standard, and nor do we have necessarily obligations for rental properties to provide access to these kinds of technologies. Have you played a role in pushing for that kind of systemic change, given the particular relationship you have with the state government? Because again, we're very concerned about lower income people, particularly low income renters, who are just still being completely left out of this change, even now in 2021.
So certainly there is a lot of new housing activity going on that's been sort of driven by policy at a range of different jurisdictional levels, and the provision of the connections to those new housing estates and new housing is certainly keeping us very, very busy. The volumes are as high as they've probably ever been in history, and certainly making sure that our system has the capacity to take the reverse flow of electricity that inevitably comes as people put solar on their roofs in a lot of those new housing developments. I'm not sure. I don't have the numbers on tap, but I'm not sure, Michael, whether we actually have this data. What proportion of new housing actually has solar already on the roof when it's built, which is presumably an easier time to build it, put it on than after the household's up and running.
And also, as part of a development approval process, knowing that if you don't have access to those technologies and you're renting out the property, you know who pays the price for that. In the end, there's a kind of a benefit that need this. I mean, these are design questions. There's plenty of policies that have been sitting there for some time about how to resolve in terms of those equity issues, but we are still very much in the kind of small scale examples of where it's being done. Important partnerships. I'm not dismissing them, but a statewide solution, because it is where we are now, with large numbers of people who are not getting the multiple benefits out of those particular arrangements for homeowners who've got the ability to fit themselves that well.
I think you're right, Cassandra, and here in Queensland there have been a couple of programs around solar on public housing, and I know that that's something that the Energy Minister is particularly interested in continuing to push, because he is the Minister for Public Housing as well. So there's a nice fit there now. So the Queensland Government's certainly been doing that as part of their public housing stock, and then also programs that provide an incentive for both landlords and also for renters, for landlords to put solar on, and there will be an arrangement, a shared arrangement between the tenants and the landlord. So I think you're quite right, though. There are some trials around. There hasn't been any mandating, but I suspect these are things that would be considered also as part of the reviews of the building codes in Queensland, which I know happens periodically, because there have been some stakeholders talking about that as well. And also energy efficiency, which is just so critical and important in terms of making sure that when renters are looking to go into a property, it is as energy efficient as possible, so that there won't be that sort of energy leakage and impacts on bills that are unnecessary.
And we're particularly looking for scope from signatories like yours to, some of the solutions, to be more active, either as an individual signatory or with a number of other signatories, to really push for the kinds of policy changes that will help you to deliver a lower energy bill for the end user. So that seems to us to be one that is
certainly, and just to go back to Andrew's point as well, through the Better Together initiatives and our own tariff reform programs, we have very much been placing front and centre that there should be an ability for those who might not be able to access products to be able to still share in the benefits, particularly when there's excess solar during the day. So tariffs like the solar SOCA that you've heard of, and other initiatives. We also have been working with, obviously, our other sectors like the agriculture sector and other segments, and really come up with tariffs that suit them. So you might be aware that through our previous tariff reforms, we worked closely with the cane growers and Queensland Farmers Federation, and were able to repurpose our load control tariffs to come up with a tariff for irrigation here in Queensland that is at a much lower rate by utilising that technology. And we think that that can be applied to other tariffs and areas as well. So we're certainly very focused on that.
Well, look, thank you. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. These discussions could go on for a long time, but thank you very much for your time today and for the disclosure. As you know, we will finalise our report in early December, and then we'll meet with the CEO Council after that. So we really appreciate your time today and your disclosure, and we'll talk to you then.
Claire, can I just say one thing too? We have had a focus on trying to get these issues elevated to board level. And Mark, you're the first director to actually turn up.
I feel special.
You should. We didn't need to ask the question, is how is this being elevated to the board, because some of the board is here. So thank you for attending, and well done to for keeping it.
I'd just like to say that these issues do receive board attention. From a board perspective, we always make our decisions, especially big strategic decisions. We always look through the customer lens. Michael's very active during our board meetings in terms of making us well aware of the impacts or otherwise of a lot of the decisions that we do make day to day. It is increasingly important on the issue that you actually raised before in terms of our journey, in terms of having customer at the centre of what we do. I actually believe we are making good progress, even from last year. When you go out there and you speak to the troops, especially in our regulated business, they are sensitive to it, and they are all on the journey, and they do see themselves as a customer-centric business. And it doesn't matter whether they're on a truck climbing a pole or sitting in an office, or indeed in our retail business dealing with clients day to day. There is an increasing awareness across our entire business of the importance of customer, the importance of affordability in the decisions that we make, and also protecting our community and our customers as well. And I know in previous discussions we've talked about NECF breaches, things like that. They still surface to the board. They still report on that to the board. We still do root cause analysis on that stuff so it doesn't occur again. So, we're very sensitive to it as directors, and, we are always looking through that lens in terms of the strategic decisions we make as we go into 2030, to meet the Queensland government's mandated target around 50% renewables, and of course our journey to net zero as well.
Thank you.
That's an excellent point to finish on. Thank you very much, Mark.
And great to see the Customer Council signing off on the disclosure and, with their observations as well. It's really good to see that sort of transparency over the process. So thanks for this afternoon too. Good to see you all.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, great.
Bye.